Hi, welcome. My name is Mark Plant. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Somos. And thank you for joining us. And for the next 30 minutes, we're going to be discussing the increasing personal and organizational liability issues that are facing CISOs today, particularly as IoT security risk escalates. Before I start, I want to take a minute just to introduce who Somos is for those of you that are not familiar with the organization. Somos' core business is that we are the number administrator for virtually all the telephone numbers in North America. So we maintain several telephone number registries with billions of numbers, and we service an ecosystem of a couple thousand service providers offering not only numbering, but related fraud and trust services based on that database. We also maintain a service called Somos ID, which is an IoT device registry, which maintains IoT device security intelligence, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. The reason we're here today is if you look, I think we've skipped one. Yeah, here it is. In Q1 of 2025, Checkpoint Firewall Company has a quarterly report where they noted that there are an average of 1,950 cyber attacks on an organization per week. So given that extreme level of activity, there have been some significant changes, and those include the fact that device vulnerabilities have been exploited 20% of the time. That doesn't seem like a fairly significant number, but if you consider that social engineering, which has always seemed to be far and wide the widest source of attacks, that's only 22%. Exploitation of device vulnerabilities has grown rapidly. All of these attacks have led to a series of regulations. The ones that are best known are Executive Order 14028 that came up in 2021, and then also moving into SEC cybersecurity disclosure, which was really passed in 23, but which has been enforced in much more depth, particularly going into 2024 and to present time. So all of those factors have led to a situation, and I wanted to, at this point, introduce my panel. And they include Danielle Levy, who is the Chief Legal Officer here at Somos, Jeremiah Solberg, who is the Principal at Tevora, and Sri Ramachandran, who is the Chief Technology here at Somos. So turning to Danielle first, you have the broadest perspective on the legal and liability issues associated with what's happening today. Can you give me some perspectives from the legal angle as to what you're seeing and how a CISO's job is changing?
There we go. Now I can do that. I'd be happy to. Thanks, Mark. You set it up the conversation really well, and there certainly is a lot changing for CISOs out there when we think about responsibility and potential liabilities. As you mentioned briefly, and to start, the Securities and Exchange Commission has been very active recently, implementing new disclosure requirements that affect all public companies. And those requirements are focused on cyber risk. So to me, that's really a clear acknowledgement of the significance of cyber risk, not only for companies, but also for investors. As an example, under the new SEC rules, public companies are now required to disclose material cyber incidents that affect their companies within 4 days. So that's a current disclosure requirement. These companies are also required to disclose in detail the processes that they use to assess, identify, and manage material cyber risks. And these requirements include information not only coming from a security team, but also about the role of executive management and the board in this cyber risk oversight. So it's really these requirements and the responsibility is flowing throughout an organization. We're also, as I think probably everyone on this call knows, seeing the SEC active in enforcing these disclosure requirements. And I think the most notable case is the SolarWinds case. In that case, the SEC alleged that SolarWinds had made false and misleading statements, public statements about its security practices. So what it was saying to the public didn't match what it was actually doing within the company. And a key point in that case that's close to the hearts of many CISOs is that the SolarWinds CISO was named as a defendant in that case. And that was the first time the SEC had done that, to actually name a CISO as an individual defendant in a case that involved cybersecurity related fraud. Now, some are calling this case an outlier, and it may be so, but I think the lesson is still true that corporate liability and potential personal responsibility is still a big deal and could be a sign of a changing liability landscape.
Thank you for that summary, Danielle. There are a lot of new pressures on CISOs. As you said, there's a new range of liability. It's not sure how absolute it is, but it certainly is changing their job. So, Jeremiah, given the new technical threats, given the new cyber threats, given the new legal threats, how has the CISO's job changed? How are they coping? What sort of new steps do they have to take to adapt to this new world?
I don't know if this session is long enough to talk about all the coping mechanisms here, but we certainly have to adapt how we do and what we do each and every day. So from my perspective, I want to talk about my role as a CISO. I've been a CISO in prior organizations. I've been a CISO for the organization at Tevora. We also manage and provide virtual CISO services for a number of organizations. I've personally been a part of those in the financial space, those in the drug development space, those with advertising companies, and even e-discovery. So I've certainly been in those environments that are regulated and that have boards that they need to report to. So a lot of my anecdotal comments here will come from my experiences. Every person's journey is a little bit different, so I'll be talking from what I've seen. As far as really, as Danielle mentioned here, the responsibility to report to, boards, their audit committees, and the requirements from the SEC to be able to have qualified individuals to be able to respond to what's going on about the current cybersecurity position requires a level of transparency that is being mandated. And that's something that's been a little bit of a transition. I'd say I've been in this field for 30 years. I'd say much earlier in my career, I certainly saw organizations that were bearing a lot of their, vulnerabilities and issues. And so this sense of being transparent is a requirement as part of various regulations, requirements, and how you build trust with your customers. So there's certainly been a shift in that direction, but kind of focusing in on the characteristics of a CISO and the voice of a CISO, we certainly we play multiple roles. We wear multiple hats. We are sometimes a negotiator. Sometimes we're a champion and cheerleader. Sometimes we're a negotiator with a vendor trying to get the right kind of tools inside of our organizations. Other times we're trying to translate what the cybersecurity landscape is to the other executives or outside regulators and making sure that we're able to convey the current state of affairs. And so how do we approach that? One of the things that we do is to make sure we've got right kind of policies and procedures and all that stuff, and to set the guardrails for an organization. But the big risks for me come in from the people risks. You mentioned cybersecurity and social awareness or social engineering attacks. That's still the number one threat vector out there. So we're constantly keeping our eyes on that. You've got the process risks. You're sharing information with third-party vendors. You're doing things day to day with various infrastructures. Those processes create risk. But your technology, sometimes you're using technology that's maybe misconfigured, or it's not properly patched, or maybe it doesn't even have support contracts anymore. So one of the big risk items for us is to be able to have proper visibility into what is our ecosystem, whether or not that's on our actual premise, in the cloud, in a joint venture that we did with someone else. How do we get that visibility? So one of the things that's really important for me is to have that visibility so we can take the teams, take our knowledge, take our expertise, and get that addressed. But if we don't know about that device, we don't know about an asset on our network, then we're blind. So one of the biggest things for me is how do I create maximum visibility to minimize the unknown within the organization? So I'm always looking, do I have the right tools? Are the right tools configured correctly for our environment? And that's an area that I think Somos ID is certainly going to be able to help address is, that visibility. For us, I'm always looking at all my dashboards and saying, all right, here's the numerator and here's the denominator. I know how many assets I have in my company. Are all of my assets inside of this tool that is looking at patch management or endpoint or vulnerability scanner, or whatever happens to be. But if I don't have the proper visibility, then I could be blind. And so for me, the biggest thing is minimize the unknowns and to create less blind spots for my visibility.
So given, do you see any current there are a lot of tools out there to scan and monitor devices. Do you see any blind spots in typical configurations these days as
Always.
they exist?
There's always blind spots. And that's where we're always trying to get a little bit better, get full visibility. There's ways to identify assets from monitoring network traffic to probing the network to having your own asset management and configuration tables and pulling all the data together. But for us, it's just minimize blind spots, maximize visibility.
Great. Visibility is important, and that is a great segue over to Shri. Let's talk about some solutions and what sort of blind spots do you see in an organization's transparency to its device base that need to be filled?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. So unmanaged assets are everywhere. So what I want to do is start off with a couple of examples of my own blind spots. So I've been doing this technology stuff for a while, and I believe I'm a reasonably, technically adept person. So I have a connected home, a smart home. I got I shouldn't say tons, and a whole bunch of cameras, lots of sensors, lots of things to actually, remotely monitor that I can show off at a cocktail party saying, hey, this is how I actually manage my house and all of that, right? So I want a couple of examples. So I have a couple of D-Link cameras, and one of them, they have a green LED when they're working, and then when they start recording something, it kind of flashes green. And suddenly I noticed them flashing green. I was like, is there a glitch in the matrix? What happened here? So it turned out I investigated and discovered that these were end-of-life cameras that I still have operating within my household, and it was obviously either breached or whatever, I don't know. So there is some bad actor somewhere who was trying to spy into my house. I immediately took it out and then realized, end of life, old software, everything was bad about it, right? So that was the first one. That was actually the more positive part of the story. The other one was I have a whole bunch of like a half a dozen or so water leak detectors all over the basement. And in January of this year, I was traveling for business, and then I got an alert that there was a water leak. And so I had 6 of them. 4 of them didn't even work. Only 2 of them actually alerted me, and the 2 were farthest away. So it turned out it was my water heater had leaked and flooded the basement. And the 2 sensors that actually reported were the furthest away from the water heater. So you know what that meant? The whole basement was flooded, and this is what happens because these devices had their battery run down and were unmanaged, right? So the cost to me went into the thousands of dollars. I can only imagine a CISO who has to probably manage thousands of these types of different devices within the enterprise network. What it means if things are breached, if there are incidents happening through them. So it could lead to millions of dollars. So that is the real risk here, right? So CISOs are really ultimately risk managers. They're just trying to make sure that they can manage the risk that this extended digital estate provides for them. And so that's a big thing. And so knowing So in my case, if I knew exactly what was going on, what the devices were, what the latest firmware or the software that should be on those devices, and the state of the battery had been, decent, had I actually managed that, I wouldn't have lost thousands of dollars on this one, right? So multiply that by orders of magnitude for a CISO to be able to manage all of that. So, and one of the other challenges that CISOs face is there was a time when everything was contained within an office. It's probably back in the 80s, 90s, and now it's a remote workforce. They have field operations. It's actually a very distributed enterprise. Pretty much every enterprise is very distributed. What that means is that they have no way to know what is inside the perimeter and what is outside. So it's a kind of a blurry notion of a perimeter for an enterprise now, right? And especially with what we call shadow IT, right? We're all working from home. We may have my daughter's college laptop or whatever also on the same network, and know we have real risks of malware bleeding from someone else's asset going through the network and actually entering the enterprise. So there's so many different risks to take care of. And part of knowing how to know what is within their domain versus outside is to know what identifies their assets. The key notion is identity. How do you know what is yours and how do you know what is not yours, right? And so when we launched Somos ID, we thought of it from that problem, which is how would CISOs want to approach this? They obviously want to know everything that they have, that they own, that they have control over, that is being brought into their so-called perimeter, right? So we started with the identities of those devices and said, okay, what else can we give them? And when you take a typical CISO, it's not going to be one particular vendor. They're going to have a very heterogeneous deployment, which includes multiple device vendors, multiple cloud networks, multiple systems, multiple connectivity modalities, and all of that. And so we wanted to provide the CISO with the appropriate dashboard so they can actually view devices holistically across different device manufacturers, across different connectivity types, and even across different use cases, because you may have a camera that is used for surveillance in one part, and then the other one, and in another case, a similar camera may be used for part of an operational technology, right? Monitoring a particular conveyor belt or something like that. And so when you have risks to those devices, either security or operational risk to them, what happens is the cost of a breach is so high, because you can either bring down their assembly line potentially, or actually have physical threats to their enterprise. So these were the thoughts when we actually created Somos ID. So focus on identity, so we can be agnostic to the type of device. You can be agnostic to the connectivity, so we can work with devices that are cellular connected, devices that are Wi-Fi or Ethernet connected, as well as technologies such as LoRaWAN. It gives us the ability to approach a CISO and say, we have you covered here. And the second thing we wanted to do was we wanted to give the CISO a way to say, you have the ability to get real-time monitoring of all those devices. So how do we do that? So every device has a firmware or software within it. And the software can be decomposed into what we call the software bill of materials. So essentially, it's like the ingredients that go into a cake, but not the cake itself, right? So it doesn't tell you how to bake the cake, but it just tells you these are the ingredients that go into the cake. And so that software bill of materials is actually a really important consideration, because we can look at each element of that and monitor for vulnerabilities in those particular elements of software. So for instance, most connected devices will have an SSL library, right, which enables devices to actually connect securely and transmit data. It's a given. And SSL libraries are the ones that are most hacked, that have known vulnerabilities and have been exploited many, many times before. So I can give you an example about this log4j. I think it happened in the 2017 or 2018 timeframe, where one particular library got breached and probably millions or maybe even billions of devices were affected just because of that one particular breach. But now what we do is, if we know that there is a particular software library that's potentially able to be breached, because what we're doing is we are scouring 150 different vulnerability databases globally. So as soon as we know that there's been a zero-day attack on a particular software library, we can actually map it back to the devices that are potentially breachable, that are potentially affected. And we can alert the CISO to say, here is your risk profile right now, which is extremely high because you just had a zero-day attack happen somewhere else, but it's going to be something that can actually affect you. So
So
that is a huge value that we're providing here.
yeah, those are very powerful insights into devices. Jeremiah, as a CISO, when you think about the tool sets that you need to invest in and balancing your benefits, um, how do you weigh looking into devices versus simply scanning the network for aberrant traffic that you can simply block if a device is corrupted? How do you balance those two challenges?
Yeah, you need to have a full suite of tools in your toolbox. And having tools that allow you to have, the insights into the composition of those devices on the network is hypercritical. The devices that are on networks today are composed of lots of different pieces of software. And so being able to keep each of those subcomponents updated will allow you to have a more mature posture for that particular device. So I use these tools not only for reactive, but proactive investigation of my network. Hey, how many of these devices are going to be out of date, no longer supported, but even to go so far as there's executive orders that have come out that say we have to have a plan to make sure that all of our encryption, talking back to the SSL, is going to be quantum resilient here in the next so many years, which means we have to do an inventory of all aspects of cryptography within our ecosystem, which isn't just our firewalls and VPN devices. It's that encryption that exists embedded in these devices that I need visibility into to be able to satisfy those specific executive orders. So for me, in-depth analysis, being able to query, being able to proactively look at these data sets to say, hey, where am I exposed? Because once I know I'm exposed here, I can take the appropriate action. I got the teams, I got the tools, I got the expertise that I can work with. But I need that, where do I focus my attention? And these are the types of tools that are so critical. Working with our SOC team, we're looking at this stuff each and every day, making sure that we're putting our attention in the right spot.
Great. So, sure, you've got a tool set. It gives CISOs great visibility to secure. How does it help with the liability issues? How does it help with the compliance issues?
So when you look at the compliance regulations, so I'll talk about a couple of them, maybe three. So there was an FCC cyber trust mark that came out last year, but it was voluntary. It was supposed to go live this year. It probably will not go live for a while. Then there is the European Union Cyber Resiliency Act, which is expected to go live towards the end of next year. And there are also other, like the executive order that you referenced, Mark, earlier, as well as the Department of Commerce automotive regulations that have come out. So they all have a very similar philosophy, which is they start from the NIST 800 base foundational security requirements. And the first foundational element of that is visibility. You got to know what you're securing. You have to have a full visibility into what you're tracking, what you're monitoring, and what you're securing before you can actually before you can actually securely manage it. And so that is a very critical part. And so what Somos ID does is to make sure that we can provide the CISOs with complete visibility and the reporting that goes with it. So they can actually essentially press a button, create a compliance report that says that shows them the visibility of the devices that they have of their devices of their digital estate that can help them comply as well as reduce liability when there is in the unfortunate incident of a breach.
Great. We are coming up on time, so I want to take a second to thank the panel. Thank you, Danielle, Jeremiah, and Shri for sharing your insights with us. There definitely is a need to make sure that there is enough visibility in devices. And if you have any questions as to how we might be able to help you improve your visibility into IoT devices to ensure you've got a solid security posture and compliance data source, feel free to reach out to us at iot@somos.com. And remember that as you go forward, device transparency is no longer a nice to have. You really need to make sure that you have full transparency to everything because what you can't see can hurt you. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.